Deere is an internationally known voice for peace and nonviolence. For over 35 years, he has traveled the world teaching, lecturing, organizing, and practicing nonviolence in the tradition of Gandhi and Dr. King. He's traveled in war zones around the world, including Iraq, Palestine, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, India, and Colombia. He lived in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Northern Ireland. He's been arrested over 80 times in acts of civil disobedience against war and spent 8 months in prison for a Plowshares disarmament action. John is on the staff of Pacem and co-founded Campaign Nonviolence, a national week of action every September. I have to note here that our local March for a Culture of Peace, which morphed into Movement for a Culture of Peace, and Peace Week Delaware, are outcomes of your work, John. Thank you. John helped organize the 2015 Vatican Conference on Nonviolence in Rome and helped draft Pope Francis' January 1, 2017 World Day of Peace message, the first statement on nonviolence in the history of the Catholic Church. A few years ago, when Archbishop Desmond Tutu nominated John Deere for the Nobel Peace Prize, he said in his letter that John Deere is the embodiment of a peacemaker. It is a huge honor for me to introduce this unique peacemaker and one of my heroes, John Deere.
Thank you so much, June. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for welcoming me. And Judy, thank you, and Medard, wherever you went, and the members of the board, and all the members of Pacem and Terris. 50 years of Pacem and Terris. What an incredible accomplishment. What a great thing to celebrate, especially in these difficult times. Of course, I love the name, which you know is from the Gospel of Luke. You know, the birth of Jesus, the angels couldn't contain themselves. They appeared to the shepherds, and they start singing, "Glory to God in the highest, Pacem and Terris to God's people, peace on earth." And then in 1963, Pope John the 23rd wrote the first statement on peace, Pacem and Terris, and your founders picked that as your name. You're the only group in the country with that name, Pacem and Terris, and I love it. And what did they do? They took up that vision here in Wilmington in Delaware, Pacem and Terris. And you lifted this banner, Pacem and Terris. And you've been holding it up for 50 years. And June tells me you're going on for another 50 years. Congratulations. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyway, it's just an honor to be with you. And I've been talking about you a lot around the country for what you've done with the Peace Week. But just to say, I'm nervous in front of all you holy peacemakers here in Delaware. I'm reminded, especially with this microphone, of the story of the young priest who's giving his first homily. He's very nervous, and he comes to the microphone, he taps on the microphone and says, "Something's wrong with this microphone." And the congregation goes, "And also with you." That's my best joke, everybody, I'm sorry. And my name is so goofy, so please just call me John, because Father Deere doesn't really work, you know. Anyway, June writes to me with an assignment. You are to explain the whole past 50 years and the next 50 years and put your story in there. That's kind of what she wrote, and it was a daunting topic. And I've been thinking about that, and I know it's real late, so I'm going to just cut a lot of it short. But just to say, a night like this, it seems to me, we all are invited to reflect on our journey of Pacem and Terris. What a great thing. Where did you turn around? From barreling down the highway of war like the rest of the world to starting on your journey of peace? When did you begin to become a peacemaker? When did you join Pacem and Terris? You know, how did you as a group come together 50 years ago and say, we're going to be Pacem and Terris people? And where are you going for the next 50 years? How are you going to pledge from this night's party for the rest of your life? You're going deeper and deeper into Pacem and Terris to fulfill your vocation as peacemakers, individually, and as a community in Wilmington, as the voice for peace in Delaware, as one of the leading voices for peace in the country. Great questions. Great, great questions. Maybe, June, if it's okay, and I'm mindful of the time, I hope, but to say a little word about how I got started, and I was going to say maybe a word about the 5 movements I've been involved in, but you could talk about all the movements, and then maybe offer a little bit about what I'm learning as you're reflecting on your journey and what you're learning. I grew up in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. I'm a child of the 60s. I was born in 1959. I'm 58. My dad was the newspaper publisher. He came out in support of Martin Luther King and John Kennedy, and so the Klan said, if you don't stop, we're going to kill your son John and my brother David. So I was getting death threats as a child in the 60s. And that had a big effect on me, I think. And my father, his brother, was the head of the newspaper family business, running the National Press Club. He died, and so 50 years ago, our family moved to D.C., and my father became the head of the National Press Club, and we were just totally politicized, Vietnam War all the time. And you remember on April 3rd, 1968, of course, our teacher, before the government killed him, Martin Luther King in Memphis said, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence, it's nonviolence or non-existent. It was the last words of the great prophet to us. We were out for dinner that next night. I'm thinking of the 50 years, you know. So on that next Friday morning at 5 a.m., my mother woke me up and said, Martin Luther King has been killed. You have to get out of bed. Okay. And so I watched TV, and my father said, we're going downtown. You need to see the riots and the police and the curfew, and you need to never forget it. And then he took me to the Poor People's Campaign and Resurrection City. And then we got really involved with Bobby Kennedy. And when Bobby Kennedy was killed, like maybe all of you, I thought, well, it's the end of the world. Certainly the end of hope. And this became the big metaphor of my life, really, because later in college, all I did was study Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. I got sick for a whole summer and was meditating them. And then I thought, well, if the country kills the 2 greatest people we've had in our history, what does this mean, and what does it mean for me? And so that led me into the meaning of life and death, and I don't know how I did this, but then I decided to become a priest. Pray for me, I made that jump. I don't see the math now, and particularly a Jesuit, and it's been a major setback. Anyway, I decided before I entered the seminary, I should go and see where Jesus lived. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Anyway, this is what happened to me. Forgive me if you heard my story. I decide I'm going to, my parents are horrified at this. I'm a dopey 21-year-old kid. They're desperate to get me not to become a priest. I said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to go hitchhiking through Israel for 3 months to see where Jesus lived. And my mother went like this, it's worse than we thought. And the week I left to hitchhike by myself, Israel invaded Lebanon. You remember the summer war of 1982, when we organized out of the Pentagon and killed 60,000 people in Lebanon in 3 months. Anyway, long story short, I hitchhiked for 3 months, was camping out at the Sea of Galilee. There's nobody there. I'm oblivious to what's going on. All I got is my Bible. I'm reading the Gospels. I go to the little chapel on the North Shore, and there on the walls, there's nobody in it. It's half the size of this room on a little hill. It says inside on the walls of the church, like graffiti, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, the gentle. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those persecuted for working for justice. And being a dopey kid, I'm standing alone there in silence. I went out loud in the church, oh my God, I think he's serious. This had never occurred to me. Like, this is what the guy wants us to do. My plan was to be a pious priest, which you see didn't take. June, I'm trying to make them laugh, and it's not working up here. But anyway, I walked out on the balcony overlooking the Sea of Galilee, as you do when you're walking for 3 months alone. And I'm looking at the sky, and I'm saying, are you telling me you want me to do this stuff? Like, isn't that for somebody else, like the Pope? You want me to be a peacemaker and to be persecuted for working for justice? And I thought, and I thought, and I thought, and I said, okay, God, I promise here and now to give my life to the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, to work for peace and justice on one condition. If you give me a sign. Wasn't that just brilliant? You know, I found a loophole. I could say, hey, it didn't come through. And all of a sudden, there were these loud explosions. 3 big black Israeli jets fell from the sky, breaking the sound barrier, setting off sonic booms, boom, 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 swooped down over the Sea of Galilee, over me, and dropped a whole bunch of bombs 15 miles away, killing people. And then I went, okay, I'll work for peace and justice. I'll never ask for a sign again. I say it kind of funny, but it had been going on the whole time. Every hour I'd been seeing, but I never thought about it. Who cares? We don't think about that. You know, for a split second, I guess I opened my eyes in case God appeared. And instead, what I saw was the reality of the world, which is mass murder. Sisters and brothers killing sisters and brothers around the planet, and this whole world of violence, which you've all been resisting and struggling against beautifully for 50 years. A week later, I entered the Jesuits, and then I met Daniel Berrigan, and, well, he said I had to go get arrested at the Pentagon. I did, and it's been downhill ever since. I'm moved that Dan gave your first speech here and seeing it in the program, and then he spoke in the 30th anniversary. But well, you know, there's just so much for you for all of us to reflect on. But June asked me to talk about movements, and you know, I could, with you, outline what we're up against. The history of violence of these 50 years. That to my mind, this, what shall I say, clinical, narcissistic, sociopath, racist, sexist, fascist president is a symptom of the culture of violence. You know, this is the normal progression since the assassination of Dr. King. I think 1968 was the turning point in our modern history, and that this is, if you will, where we've been headed, into fascism. My friend Jonathan Shell calls it global totalitarianism. We could just go on and on about what we're up against. But you know, as Pacem and Terris, that that's not the whole story. That's the good news, that there's thousands of movements happening around the world. There's more happening in the last 50 years for peace and justice than ever before. We know that documented. 2/3 of the human race are personally involved in some grassroots movement for peace and justice, just like Pacem and Terris. This is hopeful. And actually, we have the social science research, the evidence of Dr. Erica Chenoweth, which we never had before in history, that says where nonviolent direct action is used, it works. In every struggle, war, revolution from 1900 to 2006, one of the world's greatest intellectuals has now proved that Gandhi and King were right. This is incredible strength that we have in her research. You all are part of this. That's what's so wonderful, and that's why it's really worth celebrating, that you're choosing to be on that side of history, the history toward a vision of Pacem and Terris. Well, maybe I'll just say a little bit about the movements I've been involved in. Again, I invite you in the months ahead, as you reflect on your life as a person of peace and justice, your experience in Pacem and Terris. What have you been involved in over the years, you know? And what has happened to you? And where is your passion? And where are you going to go? And how can we go deeper into the movement and organize and widen it as broad as possible? So here's what I've been involved in. First of all, the anti-war movement, you know, especially from the history of the Berrigans and on. I don't know about you, but my whole life, everybody has said to me, beginning with my family, well, you're a complete failure, you know. So we have to be humble about it. But because what we're talking about is ridiculous. It's impossible. The abolition of war. That's what Pacem and Terris means. And we're talking about making the impossible possible. And maybe probable. And then theoretically inevitable. And then actual and real. That's your mission. Well, this is just brand new. We're just begun. I have felt that way since I was a kid. So I don't feel too many burdens about it. If you think about it, hundreds of years of the abolitionists, really, before we could get anywhere to the end of historic slavery. So the anti-war movement, pro-global peace movement, in my opinion, is just beginning, 100 years or 50 years old. So it's a long-haul struggle, and that's very good. For me, I lived and worked in El Salvador in 1985 under the direction of the Jesuits who were later assassinated. You know, I traveled and lived a lot in Central America and elsewhere, very involved against lots of wars. In Berkeley, I lived in 1991, and we had a demonstration every day for 3 months while the war was happening. Maybe some of you were like that too. Lived and worked in Northern Ireland. That's why I'm interested in your Ulster project. 1997 to 98, and saw with my own eyes how peace works. When the world intervenes and funds a peace process and gets people sitting at the table, wars end. Waging nonviolence works. It's amazing. I think one of the great, I'm talking about the movement, one of the greatest days in our history, in world history, was February 12th, 2003. 14 million people marched around the world in over 600 cities in all continents against a war that hadn't even started yet. This has never happened before. You remember the New York Times the next day said there are now 2 global superpowers, the United States and the global peace movement. That's us. And what you're trying to do is that power is still there. We're trying to keep awakening it and building it, especially in this moment we're in. These are great things. And I think one of the most hopeful signs right now is, this is very obscure, and I'm just glancing at my notes here, but Lithuania, which is, do you know what's going on there? They're abolishing their military, and they brought Gene Sharp over there, and they're institutionalizing nonviolent civilian-based defense system for the country. It's the first nation in the world to do this. They're going way beyond Costa Rica. Because what are they going to do if Russia invades? Start a war back? They are requiring nonviolence training in every grade from kindergarten through grad school in the entire country. Can you imagine? And we're not going to hear about this. This is where they are breaking new ground, and this is possible to do this. In fact, it's our only practical political solution. So I just encourage you to keep that banner high, because of our sisters and brothers around the world who are dying and suffering, but also for ourselves, our own humanity, our own soul, our own sanity. Second movement I could talk about at length is the anti-nuclear movement, especially with the Berrigans, and I was involved in the Plowshares movement. Finally, in 1993, with Philip Berrigan and 2 friends, we walked onto the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina, headquarters of the F-15, the cutting edge of our bombing squad, and they carry nuclear weapons. What do you do to bring Pacem and Terris? June, I don't know what to do, so Phil said, come on, and I went, and there was this sign that said, trespassers will be shot on sight, and I was like to Phil Berrigan, do I have to? Come on. And, it was 3 in the morning, and we had cased the joint the night before, and there was nobody there except for these big fighter bombers. I didn't go to that, could I? Anyway, at 3 in the morning, there was the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, like 3 Philadelphia airports, with 75 of these big fighter bombers, 10,000 soldiers milling about, cop cars, fire trucks, tanks, as far as the eye could see. And Phil said to me, while we sleep tight, the war machine barrels on full steam in our name. And we walked right through 10,000 soldiers, right up, totally illegal, to one of these big fighter bombers, And I took out a hammer and I went up to the side of it and I hammered on it once. Thank you very much. As I said to the judge later, Your Honor, I'm just doing what it says in the Bible. What's the problem? You know, Isaiah says someday these people are going to come along, beat swords into plowshares, and study war no more. We're doing it. And Your Honor, I'm just doing what Jesus said. Love your enemies, don't nuke them. That's the actual translation from the original Greek. June, help me here. The judge didn't like that either, but anyway. For that action, I faced 20 years in prison. You know, I was 8 months in a tiny cell with Phil Berrigan there and me here in the toilet there and the food coming through the door. And it was just horrific, you know, just horrific. And yet, you know, we had, my lawyer was Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General, and it took him 6 weeks to allow us to get a Bible. And we found that, you know, at breakfast we got a piece of Wonder Bread. You remember that plastic food they used to call food? And once on Mondays you got a little plastic cup. Remember those on the airplanes? And it had grape juice in it. We found if you hid the grape juice in the top of the toilet, it ferments quite nicely over time. So we read from the Gospels and broke the bread and passed the cup, and it was like God was right there. How am I doing here? Anyway, it was rough. So, you know, I can go on, and we had so many incredible experiences in our trials and with the jailers, and I did, you know, so now I can't ever vote again, and I can't travel to a lot of countries like Canada and all, and highly monitored by the government. Thank you very much. But it, you know, it was such a powerful experience. I moved to New Mexico. Was in New York City, got kicked out of New York by the church for all my anti-war work there. So I moved to New Mexico, poorest state in the country, but #1 in war making, #1 in war recruiting, and #1 in nuclear weapons. There's 1,900 nuclear weapons at the Albuquerque airport, and at Los Alamos, the birthplace of the bomb, business is booming. Obama spent billions of dollars to rebuild it. He wanted a state-of-the-art radioactive nuclear waste dump factory, and he got it. And you know, the country, of course, as you know, just voted 3 years ago to approve $1 trillion to upgrade our nuclear weapons industry. The country's not divided. All of Congress was for it, led by Obama. What do? This time we turned to the book of Jonah and our peace group, and we prayed and we thought, and so he seemed to do a good job in Nineveh. You know, marching through the town, calling everybody to repent, and everybody repented in sackcloth and ashes, from the king to all the cattle, it said. They made the cattle repent. So we formed the Sackcloth and Ashes Subcommittee. Anyway, I'm just trying to tell you something. We've been doing this for 15 years now at Los Alamos on the Hiroshima anniversary, walking through the whole town, pouring ashes all over the ground, all that was left of Hiroshima, sitting in silence, strict silence for 30 minutes to repent in sackcloth, small, medium, large, to repent of the mortal sin of war and nuclear weapons, and to beg the God of peace to give us the gift of nuclear disarmament. And you're all welcome to come and join us. A couple of years ago, these crazy folks in Norway invited Martin Sheen and I first-class tickets to Oslo to speak in the public theater. Okay, we get there, and they say, we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons. And I'm going, oh, good. And have you followed this? Norway decides, forget the United Nations, forget the United States and Britain, we're going to do this ourselves. We're getting rid of landmines through a global treaty that has totally worked. So then we're working on cluster bombs. We get a global treaty. It's getting rid of all cluster bombs. Next up is nuclear weapons. The next day, Monday and Tuesday, they invited all the nations of the world to send their Secretary of State. 125 nations went. Did you know about this? I called Amy Goodman. She says, I don't believe it. And she didn't report it. Martin and I gave the keynote speech to 1,000 people from all over the world. And it was one of the most electrifying experiences of our lives. And then they met in Mexico City, and then they met in Vienna, and then they met other places. And you followed on July 7th. Norway got the passage for the prohibition, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, signed by 122 nations. It's gone into effect last month when 53 nations signed it. First time in history, a treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons, and they say they're going to get it. And then 2 weeks ago, the group that brought us over there, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, won the Nobel Peace Prize. They're great people, my friends. Menard, they have 4 part-time staff people, and they're trying to abolish all nuclear weapons, and they say they're going to have it done like in 10 years. And they're incredible people. I'm telling you this is part of my experience, and we have to keep at it. Being against war, against nuclear weapons, speaking out against Trump's even talking about using them. Third, my involvement with the anti-death penalty movement. Well, I could go on, but like all of you with Sister Helen, and I was visiting people on death row since the early 80s, and now that I'm an ex-con, I'm not allowed in prison. So I break the law and go back into prison. This is my methodology. It's June, it's not working here, but anyway. And then, as you may know about me, and the governor of California was about to execute somebody in California, and I didn't know what to do to stop it. So being a dopey, I was a 29-year-old kid, I called Mother Teresa in Calcutta. Oddly enough, you can get right through to Mother Teresa. Mother, would you speak to the governor if I made arrangements and tell him not to kill anybody? Yes, they would, John. They would be happy to do that. So, okay. So I call the governor. They'll take you'll forgive my language, but he's screwed either way. If he turns down the call from Mother Teresa, that's not going to go over well. If he takes the call from Mother Teresa, that's going to be rough. And he takes the call. I had agreed to call her back, get a statement to give to the press. There were 35 press people. It was live on CNN. And I call her back. Mother Teresa, what did you say to Governor Deukmejian? I told him to do what Jesus would do. Yeah, but did you tell him not to kill the guy? That's what I said. I thought they'd laugh at that because that's the way I talked about it. No, John, I just told him to do what Jesus would do. So I went out and told that to the press, and then I explained what Jesus would do. I mean, just somebody had to. He wouldn't kill anybody. And the next morning in the Los Angeles Times, you remember Conrad, the most famous cartoonist, he had the cartoon, the governor on the upper left, Mother Teresa on the upper left saying, do what Jesus would do, and the governor saying, yeah, but what would Pilate do? This didn't go over too well. And they stopped the execution. And she saved 7 lives, intervening through this work. Helen Prejean, I know what's going on in Delaware. You have to keep at it. Sister Helen thinks we're closer than ever to the abolition of the death penalty. It just needs more and more concentrated work, so I just encourage you. I was in Little Rock for most of that whole week when they were going to execute 8 people. And in May, I was in Oklahoma speaking at the cathedral on behalf of the whole state against calling for the abolition of the death penalty in Oklahoma. As you know, on January, for the inauguration, I guess you all went to the Million Women March, which was very hopeful. It was like a potpourri of protests. 18 of us went to the Supreme Court for the 40th anniversary of the modern death penalty era, and we held up a big sign, "Stop the executions." And gosh, they arrested us. It's so shocking. And they put me in chains and held us chained to the wall for 12 hours. And then they put us in a little tiny cell for 48 hours, which hadn't been cleaned since 1840. The walls were covered with cockroaches, just all in a bright line. And we're people of nonviolence, June, so we're going, okay, now this is a challenge to our nonviolence. But we find if we let them be, they let us be. Anyway. It was very powerful, and I'm just off my probation and my community service, so I'm really happy to be here with you tonight, is what I'm saying. The environmental movement. Like you, I'm trying to make the connections. 15 years ago, when I moved to New Mexico, I live on this very remote mountaintop at 8,000 feet in a handmade adobe house with no electricity, no water, solar panels when they work. And it's changed my life. And I've been writing this book, which is coming out in February, on the connection between nonviolence and solidarity with the earth. Well, it's right there in the third beatitude. Terris Merton said, "Blessed are the meek, the nonviolent." The deeper you go into nonviolence, the more you're one with creation. Well, we don't believe in nonviolence. So the deeper we go into global systemic violence, catastrophic climate change is inevitable. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. That's why we have to make these connections and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and I'm trying to do that. And I got involved in the leadership of the big march in New York City. It was just an incredible experience. I hope you were all there. 425,000 people. But the Daily News just had a little tiny picture of Leonardo DiCaprio and said, "Leo marches for the earth." But we got to keep going. And there's hope I've learned through the movement. And that's what the thinking is in the leadership globally around the environmental movement. If we're going to resist the Trump administration and the climate deniers, in all of these struggles, we're connecting the dots, but we have to speak out publicly and organize on behalf of Mother Earth and the creatures. And like our indigenous sisters and brothers who learned this millennia ago, we have to live the connections and be people of the earth, because Pacem is in Terris. Fifth, lastly, the global grassroots movement of nonviolence, even in the church of all things, going to be rough. This is where my passion has been, because I just think Gandhi and King were right. And there's the most hope for the planet. So we organized Campaign Nonviolence. 4 years ago, we said, let's call upon the country to take to the streets against everything. War, racism, well, I could go down a list, nuclear weapons, poverty, environmental destruction, but for a culture of nonviolence, as Dr. King said. And June and people like you all around the country responded. So last month, while you had the Delaware Peace Week, all over the country in Campaign Nonviolence, we had 1,606 actions and marches around the country. What do you think of that? It's very hopeful. People connecting these movements. And I think the Delaware Peace Week was the greatest of them all. Really, really terrific. And really, we hired a national PR firm and can't get any national press in all of this. But we're going to go anyway. And, you know, you can imagine me. Forgive me for being a name dropper. I was with Archbishop Tutu a couple years ago in South Africa, and you see how I am, and he knows me. And I was going, "Hey, Archbishop Tutu, guess what we're doing? Guess what I've done? I started Campaign Nonviolence, and we're getting everybody around the country to march against everything and for a new culture of nonviolence. Wasn't that great?" And he goes, he goes, "Well, it's about time, John." And then he said, "Do you know how long God has been waiting patiently for you to do this?" Who brought up God? That was a very sobering and helpful thing to say. And I am not laying a trip on you, but I am asking you that question. Do you know how long God is waiting for you, been waiting for you to do these things? What else is the God of peace patiently waiting for us to do in the years ahead? It's a powerful spiritual question. Next year, Delaware Peace Week has to go to over 100 actions. We have to contact every church, synagogue, and mosque in the state of Delaware and really invite everyone to make these connections. And on Saturday, September 22nd, 2018, the end of the week, we're going to have a big march in Washington, D.C. that we're organizing from the Dr. King statue to the White House. And I want to invite all of you to come, and all 3,500 people who are part of Delaware Peace Week, come to Washington, D.C. You can do that if you leave like at 7 a.m. Meet us at the Dr. King statue. Come and say hello to me, and we're marching. What do you think of that? So I want you to join us. I want you to pursue this vision of nonviolent Wilmington that's taken off from nonviolent Carbondale. There are now 50 cities working on this as a new way to organize and envision your community. And you need that here in Wilmington. After last night and all the killings, it's going to get worse unless you come together with a common vision and use Dr. King, who taught us this is going beyond Dr. King, or really applying him in a new way, and it's working. We just had 400 people last month in Cincinnati launch Nonviolent Cincinnati. That's a very hopeful sign. Meanwhile, we're working with the Vatican. You think you got it rough here in Wilmington. I'm trying to make them laugh, June, and it's not work, but... And, there I was. We had this conference on nonviolence, and I went up to the cardinal, because you don't get to meet cardinals, and I hit him. Forgive me, but I pushed all my buttons. I said, Cardinal Turkson, we need an encyclical from Pope Francis to get rid of the just war theory, to call the whole world back to the nonviolence of Jesus and change the planet. And he hit me back and said, I know who you are. I need you to write Pope Francis's next World Day of Peace message on nonviolence. And it went on like that. And this statement I hope you've read and used. I was with him for 3 days last weekend in San Diego. We are working for an encyclical on nonviolence. If it happens, like Laudato Si on the environment, use it. It's an opportunity to change the planet. What have I learned from all this? What are you learning from all this? 50 years of Pacem and Terris. I wrote this down. The nonviolent struggle for justice and peace is our life. The struggle never ends. To be fully human today is to be part of the global grassroots movement of justice and peace and nonviolence till the day we die. What you are doing is sowing seeds for a harvest we're not going to live to see. But that's okay. The Pentagon, the government, the president say nothing can be done. You can't make a difference, so give up. And we go right along. Oh, we're helpless. We're powerless. There's nothing that can be done. Nonviolence, Dr. King said, means power. We are not powerless. Don't believe that lie. We have the power to change the world nonviolently. Didn't I just hear the imagination players sing that to us? We can do this. We have far more power than we realize. Claim it. That's what we're celebrating tonight. And what we have to go deeper in than ever before. I've learned that nonviolence works, that it's not only the heart of the spiritual life, but it's the most hopeful, best practical political solution left for positive social change. That Gandhi and Dr. King was right, and that this is the best thing we can do with our lives. Forgive me for name dropping too, but the night the Iraq War began, was it March 19th, 2003? In Santa Fe, Joan Baez came for a concert. She's been my old friend. I think she's been more involved in all the movements on the planet than any living person right now. We were both incredibly depressed, and I sat up with her early into the morning in her bus, and I'm telling her my problems. Oh, there's no hope. There's nothing that can be done. And she's listening to me, and finally I shut up, and Joan Baez says to me, I love this. Well, you know what Gandhi said? Well, right there she had it, because who talks about Gandhi except for... And she gave this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I share with you. One sentence. Full effort is full victory. And that's been the basis of Joan's life. And that's the basis of 50 years of Pacem and Terris and the way forward for all of us, I think, before. I invite you, dear friends, not to give in to despair or hopelessness or helplessness or the lie of our powerlessness, but to rise to the occasion, to become your best selves, to redouble your efforts, to give it full effort, to do everything you can to resist this insanity in this world of systemic violence in all its form, to pursue the Pacem and Terris global vision of peace on earth, to be determined, strategic, bold, and to act in faith like you're headed toward full victory. What do you think of that? Well, I've been drinking coffee all day, but I hope that's what you're doing. I could go on and on here. I just want to congratulate you, urge you to go deeper and bolder. Keep asking, how can we become the Pacem and Terris people we are called to be? How can we continue Pacem and Terris for the rest of our lives? How can we invite everyone in Wilmington and Delaware and the nation and the country into the Pacem and Terris vision? How can we live it more and more in our hearts, embody it in our bodies, practice it toward everybody on earth, Speak out publicly and uphold that vision. What did Jesus say? If you are peacemakers, you will be called the sons and daughters of the God of peace. That's what you've been doing for 50 years. That's what you're called to do for the next 50, for the rest of your lives, for future generations, for Mother Earth and her creatures. This is who you are and who you are called to be. The sons and daughters of the God of peace, peacemakers, Pacem and Terris people. People, you'll forgive me, who make the angels sing all over again, who make the angels rejoice, who make the angels start going, glory to God, the God of peace in the highest, because you, Pacem and Terris, make their holy announcement come true. Let the celebrations begin.
Let it begin.
Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to